isiZULU, D'Angelo Brooks, Ariana Cervantes, Fernanda Montellano, and Jesus Zavala. Relevant demographics and social determinants. You can see the charts here that refer to population per province, country, and as far as language use, isiZULU being the largest. You also see in one of the first chart that there is a section that are a colored population. That's an apartheid government term that refers to people who are mixed of white and African or white and Asian. Another thing to indicate, you'll see that there is an Indian Asian population that's pretty sizable in South Africa, and that's due to there was a population of 152,184 indentured servants who served the British Empire, who were brought to this part of the world as they were continuing their colonization of South Africa. And then you'll also see the one thing they still measure in this part of the world is access to water and electricity. You'll see the margins there, pretty bad for people of color. Also unemployment rate, and then apartheid officially ending on May 4th, 1990. But these charts basically show us the continued aftermath, especially when it comes to educational attainment. isiZulu orthography, Kuyinto Apanzi. isiZulu orthography is shallow. We know isiZulu orthography was started by European and Christian American missionaries early 1800s. The first isiZulu grammar book was written by a Norwegian in 1850. It's pictured on the right by Hans Schroeder. They did use the Roman Latin alphabet, as you'll see pictured there, the common we use here in English. The formation is left to right. Subject, verb, object is the constituent word order. Their spatial arrangement, because it's the Roman alphabet, means that in Zulu, sometimes you start sentences with long words. Example here being Gwenzenjani, Jesus. What is it, Jesus? Agglutinative language, so words are made up of smaller units for creating clumps. Another example would be here Baibeli, which means Bible. And then, of course, we know about these additional graphemes because it's a tonal language, which means they use a lot of prosody. Words are meaningful units of speech consisting of one or more syllables adhering together in a unity of a fully stressed syllable, wrote Charles Doak in 1955. Interestingly enough, when you read his book and he gives you examples of the language, he uses diacritics and circumflexes to promote the tonality of it, which is interesting as you'll read on. When Dr. Jones first asked me if isiZulu was a shallow or deep orthography, I think I had the deer in headlights kind of look. I hadn't really understood it at the time. I think when we did our first presentation, that's probably the one area where I probably needed to dive in a little deeper, no pun intended. And so I kind of did that. And so the easiest way that I could explain sort of the difference between a shallow and a deep orthography, at least in terms of isiZulu versus something that's deep like English and French, is the use of the PH sound in isiZulu is as it's written. So when you see a P and H, they have the separate sounds of P and H. So for example, there's a word here I wrote, says Koop He. You see the P and H are separate. So for example, if you were going to say the word telephone in a more shallow manner, you would say telephone. You would pronounce the P and H as they are sounded out versus P and H as an F sound. So telephone in isiZulu versus telephone in English is one way I can explain it. Another big difference is that English and French use diacritics, accents. They also tend to deviate to a large extent from the phonology of the spoken word. That's kind of how the letter A is used in words like case, car, cat, and call. And then there are very complex vowel sounds at times. The AI sound, the EA, the AW, and the OY, which we're all familiar with. English, of course, uses a high amount of homophones. I threw the ball versus I went through the door. I see you versus I went swimming in the sea. I'll break the glass versus, hey, you know what, I need to take a break. And then there's different pronunciations for similar spelling patterns, tough, though, and through. Actually, maybe break is more like somebody hit the brake kind of word versus take a break. Sorry. And then, of course, difficult orthographies can take years and years to gain fluency. That's what makes them deep. But then again, if you are not a native isiZulu speaker and you're not familiar with some of the complexities like click consonants, elongated words. You could probably find yourself having a little bit of trouble learning that language as well. But those are the two main differences as to what separates deep orthography, where you can go scuba diving, versus a shallow orthography, where you can go snorkeling. All right, and then here is a video that plays some different sounds from isiZulu. Please pay attention to the PH sounds in the isiZulu words.
Homeschool literacy in the Zulu language. There is a lack of home and school connection to reading specifically. Families of this ethnic group rely extremely heavily on teachers and schools to bring about practices of reading and put those into relation. Because of this, we see that reading is done solely through the purpose of studying for school and biblical purposes, which is uncommon in the US, as for reading is a big factor of being done for fun, which is not common at all in the Zulu community. Because of this, our interviewer mentioned to us that there is no culture of reading in the Zulu language. There are spaces provided for communities, libraries are accessible, but they're not utilized. This brought me to one of the readings from prior in the course, Family and Reading in 41 Countries, Differences Across Cultures and Students, Chiyu and McBride Ching. A quote from them: family members can be considered in relation to resources for reading achievement in at least two ways: resource report and resource dilution. This is important to note because we see that in our Zulu community, because of this family's reliance on teachers and schools, teachers fall short in having the family as a resource and support for students reading.
Homeschool literacy continued. Some of the early reading exposure that our environment and many other environments experience is environmental print. Environmental print is the common words on billboards, food packaging, signs, and etc. For us, an issue that we see is that a lot of these environmental print are mostly sewn in English rather than the mother tongue, and because of that, there is a bigger disconnect in exposure to reading and seeing words early on in life. Touching back on a point made in the previous slide, the reading for fun being beneficial is pushed away in our Zulu community. I want to note this again because this is part of the reason why we see such a disconnect in reading achievement in our community and the culture of reading in the community. Our interviewee expressed to us how powerful the culture of reading disconnect is shown in her community by having resources but not using them, and the disconnect in reading achievement. Reading achievement for the US has grown strong because of this idea of reading for fun. Schools cannot solely provide resources, materials, and instruction for educators in teachings of reading. Because of this, I feel we are pushing towards trying to get parent and guardian involvement as a resource. Having the ability to rely on at-home instruction and exposure has the power to create a difference in our culture's reading achievement and culture of reading. In grade R reception year, This is where education starts to show the lag in reading development. Because of this, we are able to acknowledge the diacritic and curricular fixes determines the word's understanding and being defined. In the Zulu language, there are words that can have meanings that are different from what they are meant if they are not used with the correct diacritic and circumflexes. For example, a word meaning please in Zulu language can be seen as red and go if not properly use of diacritic and circumflexes in the language.
Learning to read. isiZULU is an agglutinative language made of three click consonants C, Q, and X, with 15 noun classes. Our brains learn to link our visual system with our spoken language system, changing how we process sounds and meanings. Learning to read is an instructed skill that requires decoding and comprehension to build reading fluency. Tone plays a crucial role in distinguishing meaning. Therefore, the Zulu tonal system has three main tones: low tone, set a normal or lower pitch; high tone, set a higher pitch; falling tone, starts high and drops within the same syllable. As we can see in this example, the isiZulu language does not use the acute accent. I'll be using the acute accent to show where the tone and the pitch of the syllable have been added. We can see that the same word, changing the tone allows you to have a different meaning, such as bala could mean read or count depending on the pitch. Learning to read. Young learners require repetition and reinforcement for learning to linger auditory and visual information. Learners show a low reading proficiency, indicating significant challenges in developing foundational reading skills. Teachers on the foundational phase should be a top funding priority because their training builds reading skills like phonics and letter to sound recognition. This then leads to teachers having challenges while teaching students to read, such as overloading curriculum. Teachers feel pressure by the tight curriculum and the pacing guides, which forces them to move ahead before learners fully grasp basic reading concepts like phonemic awareness or decoding. Another challenge is that most teachers in the education programs are centered around English, leaving teachers without the tools to apply effective reading strategies in isiZulu. There's a lack of support and resources. Teachers find themselves not having the right materials or feel or knowledge appropriate isiZulu storybooks. Word learning. Vocabulary must be taught explicitly and systematically, using words in context and revisiting them. Strong foundation in the home language supports vocabulary acquisition. Sadly, for many of the South African students, their parents are in the low income where they don't have that much exposure to the complex vocabulary. Therefore, it's harder for them to be able to hear those words. Oral discussion, storytelling, and interaction with more proficient speakers help learners expand word knowledge. Sadly, in schools in South Africa, we don't see that much teachers in the classroom. There's a lack of teachers, and there's times where a teacher is teaching two grade levels. This makes it hard for students to focus and to have that one-on-one teaching experience where they are able to ask questions and have more depth and complex relationship with the teacher. And the policy of South Africa allows for instruction in the home language in early grades, but often shifts too early to English. During the apartheid, there was a privilege of having more English in the classrooms. Therefore, having more English in the classroom allowed for this shift in which the foundational phase, which is grades 1 through the third grade, they learn their home language, which is isiZulu. Then they shift to English, this is a rapid transition where students are not able to comprehend the foundations and the skills that requires to learn a language proficient.
Here, there's a quote that says, "At the end of the year of 2009, the grade 3 had only 5 pages in their language exercise book during the entire year." This shows the lack of print, the lack of exposure to the purpose of print that allows students to learn the basics and have a good understanding of it. Word learning. Policies advocate for mother tongue instruction. Learners exhibit low reading levels in Zulu and English after 3 years of learning. Policies have been advocating for schools to implement their first language, their mother tongue, with this saying that this would fix the issues of the poor performance of students in South Africa. Yet, the struggle with phonemic awareness and word recognition because learners have a lack of explicit instruction. For example, educators prioritize oral activities over writing activities. The students are not having the access to having print in their classroom and access to it in their household. In the foundational phase, the classroom had little access to print and shared book reading and writing activities were rare. The author emphasizes the need for a more balanced approach that integrates both oral and written language practices in the classroom. Enhancing vocabulary learning requires deliberate instruction, exposure to a variety of texts.
isiZULU reading comprehension topics include cultural context, language proficiency, interactive read alouds, and domain differentiated instruction. Developing a love for reading and honoring language are essential for fostering isiZULU learning environments that are beneficial to students. Culturally appropriate books increase students' ability to resonate with material and are essential for isiZULU reading instruction. Language proficiency in isiZULU is developed through phonetical teaching, which improves ability to read, and giving instructions in the way students approach certain texts through summarizing, asking questions, and making predictions also improve their proficiency. Interactive read alouds are used to model reading comprehension, and conversing about the text in isiZULU improves language proficiency and understanding. Differentiated instruction is important to ensure students have their needs met depending on their level of reading comprehension. A bibliometric review conducted on 95 isiZULU reading articles determined that South Africa was the main producer of research regarding isiZULU language. It was shown that reading comprehension instruction significantly impacts how teachers apply their lessons in the classroom, and importance is should be placed on cultural relevance in curriculum in order to improve pedagogical practice, in turn building interest and personal connections that students have to what they're learning. A 2019 report from Probert discusses Southern Bantu languages and their focuses on the morpheme as a reading grain size. And Spall et al., their study finds that third graders in Bantu languages such as isiZoha, isiChoha, Zoha, and Setswana prefer the syllable as their predominant grain size unit. This gives clues on reading development for children in similar languages such as isiZULU.
Motivation and engagement sure doesn't come easy in a country with 11 official languages. When students believe they are efficacious at a given activity, such as reading, they perform more optimally. Definition of efficacious is having the power to produce a desired or intended effect. Like many countries like South Africa, where there's populations that live in rural areas that are inundated with poverty, primary motivation usually comes down to, how better education can lead to better outcomes in life. Obviously, education can also be the means to get out of poverty, which there's lots of in South Africa. In our interview with Professor MCHIZE of University of KwaZulu Natal, who actually is a lecturer there in phonetics and phonology, gave us some excerpts from her interview. So when she was really young, she mentioned that she used to read. She was having fun, just writing and spelling whatever came across. Felt it was very liberating. She did mention that there are libraries in South Africa, but unfortunately she says that they're empty. And then another motivation she did mention was that she did read a lot of scripture when she was young, and she felt that it was important to learn scripture, which in turn meant learning how to read because her family pride was at stake. So definitely a sense of motivation from that aspect. And then you'll also see that there's public programs because there are some low literacy rates for adults, 10.2% in South Africa. You'll see the fourth grade learner rates are pretty low as well. Two studies that were done, 2021 and 2016, show a good majority of fourth grade learners really lack foundational and true, real literacy and fluency in reading their native languages. Another key finding was to mention that from one of the studies we saw that the main challenges that they see to these problems are pedagogical, whereas the teachers mainly believe they lack support, structures, and developmental education for them as well that would kind of let them develop, grow with the curriculum, and then also apply, set methods that do work and are tried and true. And then that's pretty much it.